Haha. So, hello everybody and welcome to my first live stream. I'm joined today, as you've just heard, by the lovely Courtney, who is the owner of One More Bite vegan food business and also one of the administrators at the Seitan Appreciation Society on Facebook, which is a group of, 120,000 people now?
Yes, yes. And if you need inspiration, if you need help, then it's a place to go.
Yeah, I'll put the link to that group in.
Met.
That's how we met many years ago.
Yep.
So
Many years ago.
I'll put a link to that in the description after the live chat. And I'm going to be making my new recipe, which is a alternative to a very popular UK product called, I won't say what it's called, but it's basically chicken tikka pieces. This is what it's going to look like, just like that. And I'm going to make it today, and I will post the ingredients and the recipe in the description afterwards. I'm going to steam this. No, I'm not. I'm going to simmer this recipe. I've used a pressure cooker before. I've used steaming. I've tried baking, but for this one, I like to simmer it for a multitude of reasons. But I'll also, as we go on, because what I'd like to do in my recipes is be as transparent as possible. Because you see a lot of recipes on the internet and they look perfect, they're all displayed lovely, and they don't tell you all the ways it could go wrong. And I've done this recipe maybe 25 times now, and probably 18 of them have gone wrong to some degree, and I've been tearing my hair out until I finally kind of figured out all the nuances and how to do it. So I'll tell you exactly along the way what you might find and what problems could go wrong, and try and give you a bit of insight into how to make it as perfect a process as possible. What you will need is, so I've got behind here, I've got a big pan like this. I think it's about 10 litres. And I simmer that in that. So what you want to do to get started first is to heat the water up, because otherwise you can be like, oops, and you got another like 45 minutes to wait.
Just plain water?
No, we're going to be adding some spices to it to make sure we don't lose much of the flavour into the water. So you want to make sure you get it to, what I do is I go past the maximum of the flame until it's just a tiny bit of flame. And then I just do a quick check until it's just about bubbling in a few places. And if you spoil enough to have one of these where you can find out the temperature, what I've noticed is at 90 degrees or above, it's likely to burst. And at about 82 degrees, it doesn't burst. You just have to cook it for about 15 minutes longer, because it's about a 12-13% difference in temperature. So you want to make sure that your water... Yeah, very. If I could show you, I haven't got a camera, but it's... And what you want to do is you want to make sure that the water's simmering the way you're going to have the lid on it, because otherwise you could have it get into a certain temperature, then you put the lid on and it's a lot hotter and you'll find that it's boiling, and then your seitan will burst. So that's the first step. Okay. And then what you want to do is you want to get your food processor. Now, like I've said, I'm using my big commercial one because, well, I can't find the blade to the small one. But the way you would process this dough is exactly the same way that I do in my chicken shreds video, which is you quarter it into fours and you do it in 1 minute segments. So if you watch the chicken shreds video, the food processor part, you can get a really good idea from that. Though this one you don't need to process as much. So what you will want to do...
Will you link the shreds video in the description also so you can see that?
That's a very good idea. I'm glad you're here. Okay. So when I do this, I'll tell you what to do with a less powerful processor so you don't kill it. So first of all, we want to do the wet mix. So I like to put all my wet ingredients into a bowl first and just tip them in all together. So what you want to do is you want to get 1 tin of white beans. I've just got haricot beans. Where's the camera? You can use cannellini beans, white broad beans. I don't think it really matters. And what you want to do...
As long as it's light colored bean, right? You don't want to use like a black bean.
Yeah, because this is because this is a white meat recipe. Even though most beans are white inside, say the red kidney beans, you'll get a bit of that red and it won't look as authentic. So I'll get my... Basically, I'm just going to... This time around, I'm going to waste the aquafaba just for speed. And you just want to give them a quick rinse.
And I will say, if you're a vegan baker, don't ever waste your aquafaba.
No, I just don't have a spare tub at the moment. So this,
I gotcha.
This, at least in the UK, this is going to be around about 240 grams. And then what you want to do is, so the tins are 400 grams, and that's what I based it around. So you want to bring the water up to a 400, and then add another 125. So really what you want to do is just pour in water until you get to now, and you've got the scales on, it says about 240. You want to keep pouring in water until it gets up to 525 grams.
Okay.
And then what you want to add is a tablespoon of apple cider vinegar. So for anybody who doesn't know, this helps to cut out the gluten taste in the Vital Wheat gluten. It helps to kind of, in fact, it's a really good flavour changer for any recipe. I use it as a deglazer if I'm sauteing something, so I like to water saute. So the last part of the water saute, I'll use some apple cider vinegar instead, until that's evaporated and the flavour's really enhanced. And then you want to get 2 tablespoons of white miso paste. I was saying to Courtney earlier, I got this from Amazon because where I live you can't get it anywhere. If you don't know where to get it, in fact, again, I'll plug the Seitan Appreciation Society on Facebook because loads of people from all over the world are in it and they'll be able to tell you where to get it from.
Yes.
So 2 tablespoons of white miso paste. It's pretty much the only salt I'm actually putting in this recipe. So I like
because it'll be picking up some salt from the sauce and everything, right?
Well, it's a dry powder actually, the tikka powder.
Oh, okay.
Cool, so we got our miso paste in. And then we want to add a tablespoon of oil. You can avoid this step. It adds to the juiciness, like the moistness of it, and it helps to stop the gluten forming too strongly because these are meant to be a little bit softer, so it kind of helps in that regard. You'll find it might be a bit drier if you don't use oil.
Right.
Do you find that as well?
You can sub aquafaba for it. Yes, I do. Mm-hmm. It helps with the mouthfeel. It helps with the tenderness. But you can sub other liquid for it if you're avoiding oil because you're whole food plant based or
exactly.
Or, whatever you're. Yeah.
So I'm now going to dump this into my food processor.
Okay.
So this is all part of the wet mix of making seitan. So we're now going to add our dry spices. A tablespoon of onion powder, which is 3 teaspoons. And 16 tablespoons is a cup, by the way, if anyone's interested.
Yes.
And we also want 2 teaspoons of garlic powder. Oh, you can't actually see that very well there, look. I'm running low on these.
Yes, you are.
And we also want 1/4 teaspoon of white pepper. I put white pepper in every single seitan recipe every single seitan recipe because if you smell white pepper, it smells a bit farmy. And I found if you just, especially with, it just adds to that authenticity of the farmy aspect of where the non-vegan versions, the animal versions would have come from.
Exactly.
And then you want 1/8 teaspoon of black pepper. I find this also helps to cut out the gluten taste a little bit as well too. And then, so normally with a white meat recipe, I would try and avoid any dark ingredients really, but because this one's going to get coated anyway, it doesn't really matter. So through testing, I found if you take some of the, in fact, I've got the wrong thing out of the cupboard. Where is it? Cool. If you take some of the tikka powder, and actually we're going to put 2 teaspoons of it directly into the dough. I use my own stock powder basically. So I use a saltless stock powder from a company called Masal that do like a healthcare version, and that's on Amazon as well. And they do that in they sell it to hospitals so they can moderate how much salt everybody gets. So I use that, and it is 2 tablespoons of nutritional yeast to the stuff, to 1 tablespoon of the stock powder. And that kind of gives it kind of like a roast chicken crisps kind of smell. And what you want is 15 grams of that. Cool.
This version then, since you're using a no salt bouillon, is it lower in sodium than the store-bought version?
Yeah, and actually I've got screenshots of the nutritional difference between the 2 products. So if you want to know just if you'd like to know just how much better the nutrition is, especially when you consider how much cheaper it is, stick around because I'll be putting up a little bit later on the difference between the 2 on Chronometer. So we want to be putting this into the blender. Now I don't know how loud this is going to go, but we're going to find out. See if you can still hear me. And basically we're just going to blend this up until it's as smooth as it can be, really, with what you have on offer. So I'm going to put this on for 1 minute. And it's going to be on high power, so it might go quite loud. So you want to get as much of the wet mix down into the middle as possible to get as much flavour. So that's all I'm doing now. Just making sure that I haven't lost anything, because I know how my food processor works. And it really is now as simple as putting in 300 grams of Vital Wheat gluten. So if you don't know what Vital Wheat gluten is, I don't know who's watching. They've taken a flour and water dough and they've freeze dried it. No, they've washed off all of the starch, so you're just left with a glob of protein, the gluten. Then they've freeze dried it, or however they've done it, and then they've just ground it down into a powder. And you know a lot about doing washed flour things, don't you? But I like the control you get with Vital Wheat gluten, because, you know?
It's much easier to use Vital Wheat gluten. Washed flour, there's a lot of variables with different crops, and it takes a lot of time, but there's just 2 different options. But Vital Wheat gluten is definitely an easier product, and definitely easier to be more precise with it.
Yeah, so I'm putting in exactly 300 grams of Vital Wheat gluten. So if you now are faced with using a much cheaper food processor, what you might want to do is either just pulse it all together. Yeah, you'd want to just pulse it all together in the food processor until you've made a dough. This is a lot easier than doing it by hand, so I'm lazy. So just put it on the lowest setting.
It's not lazy, it's just efficient.
Yeah. So you just want to make sure that all of the dough is incorporated, all the flour's incorporated. Pretty much, as with most seitan recipes, the part that's going to be the most important part is going to be the processing of the dough once we've made it. So what you find with seitan recipes a lot of the time is they're all very similar at the start. You have your wet mix with flavours, then you have your Vital Wheat gluten, and then suddenly the process is the thing that makes the difference.
Yep.
So all we're doing is
we're
combining.
I think it's what makes the difference between average and outstanding seitan.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Because there's a lot of variables with seitan. There's a lot of things that can go wrong or make it not how you'd expect it to go. So with this recipe, I'm going to show you exactly what I do after we made the dough, why I do it this way, what can go wrong if you do it differently, and what can still go wrong even if you do it this way. Like sometimes it's just you can't predict it. So at this point, with a smaller food processor, you take the dough out as is, and it's kind of like in a very like crumbly state, like it pulls apart really easily. And you can divide this into the whole, I've taken out a little bit, but there's a lot more in there. You divide it into 4, and then you process it for 1 minute, and then give it a rest, and then 1 minute again, and do that with the other 3. And just make sure you put them in a bowl and covering them. Just like in my chicken shreds video, if you want to go over, it's the other video on my channel, it's called Perfect Every Time. That shows the exact process I'm on about right now. Right, so I'm going to process this for 1.5 minutes in mine straight through because it can. And that's the only reason. If yours can't, then don't, because you can blow it. And Courtney knows about this.
Oh yes, yes. So it doesn't necessarily blow the motor. What I've found is that it breaks the motor mount, and then your just kind of spins around wildly inside and causes a lot of problems. But if you're using a smaller machine at home, you definitely don't want to leave the machine, and you definitely want to keep it on the top.
So this is, compared to my other video, this is going to look slightly different. It's not, so you want it to just be warm, not hot, and like, because in my other one, you go like that and it sticks to your hand. That like taffy, that's what you want in the shreds one. This one, you want it a little bit softer. So it's like, it's pliable and it comes apart easily, and you can see the fibers, but you can see it kind of coming apart a bit there.
Yes.
You don't want it to be too glutinous, if that's the right word. And at this point, what you're going to do is you're going to get yourself a tub. You're going to want to give it at least half an hour, maybe even an hour.
Right.
Because the gluten kind of forms into one big glob. It gets stronger, but you don't lose the tenderness from the beans. Why have I used beans in this recipe? I think that's a very good point. So when you're making seitan...
That's a great question, Adam. Why did you use beans?
Thank you for asking. So when you're making seitan, you kind of want to make it in a way that so if you're going to reheat the seitan later, you need to know that because you're going to want to do it in a certain way. If you're going to use it as a cold product, then you need to know that as well because you want to do it in a certain way. So what seitan does is when you heat it, it gets softer. It gets a lot softer when it's heated up. So if you are to use something like beans, when you heat it up, it will get really soft, and that doesn't have as much of an authentic flavor texture. So in my shreds video, I use pea protein isolate, and a lot of people ask, why did I use that? I use that because that's the most densest addition to gluten that stops it being, if you just use gluten flour, it'll be too rubbery. So you need to cut it with something. And this is where you make the decision. Is it going to be something I reheat, or is it going to be something that's going to be cold? So that's why I've used beans, basically. I don't, there's too much information on it, but it's really, I think it's really important to plan ahead of time.
But it also adds to the overall nutrition value, though, because you've got additional source of protein in there, additional fiber. Nutritionally, the beans add a lot.
So I've bought products before and I've not liked the taste or the texture or the price, one of the three. So I seek to replicate it. So this is
nutrition.
And the nutrition as well. So in the supermarket replica of what I'm making, they don't use any fresh or whole ingredients. It's all gums and powders. So we are using a gluten flour, but other than that, everything else is pretty good. So you got your spices, you got your apple cider vinegar, your nutritional yeast, but then you've got whole white beans. So what you can see is mine's on the left and the shop one's on the right.
Yes. Yes.
My one is lower in calories, it's higher in protein, it's the same in carbs, and it's more than 4 times lower in fat. And as you can see nutritionally, I think some of them, they don't have the nutritional information on chronometer, but you can see the sodium in mine is less than half. So what you're doing is you're
definitely what I would rather have.
So in this recipe of my first series of my supermarket alternatives, what you're getting is you're getting 75% cheaper. So for me, doing a small batch, buying the ingredients from the supermarket for making it yourself, it costs about £5 per kilogram. If you're about to, and that includes all utilities as well. And if you were to buy this in the shops, then it would cost you £25 per kilogram. So you'll be paying £3 for 130 grams. So you're saving 75% and you're gaining nutrition. And to be honest, the texture's a lot better than the shop one too. And it boosts your culinary skills. So
that's true.
It's a win-win-win-win.
Learn a new skill while you're eating better. Yep.
And there's a lot less plastic involved with the packaging, etc. too. So this is an hour later. We're an hour later. So what you want to do is, I found this the most efficient way of doing it. You want to snake it out to around about the width of a piece of, in fact, so I've got this parchment paper here, which is 38 centimeters wide. And I do it so I can just tuck it underneath the ends. So I have my piece of parchment out here, and I'm going to make the seitan till it's around about like that wide, right?
Okay.
So you wangle it out till it's around about that width. You can see it's roughly like, it's roughly around about like, like that compared to the parchment. And what you want is you want parchment and you want a muslin cloth. The parchment is just making sure you don't get stuck dry bits to the muslin cloth.
Do we need to oil the parchment or anything, or just parchment?
What we're going to do is we're going to, oh, I'll let you know in a second, but good question. So you get it out to around about like that. And what we're doing is we're going to slice it like, we're going to slice it like this, like. So we're leaving a bit at the end. We'll basically turn it into a doubly long snake, but just quicker. So we're slicing it like that, right down the middle, and then breaking it open, and then making sure that's kind of smoothed off. And then you've essentially got a longer snake, but we're doing it like this.
Right.
So this is part of the important part of the process that I was on about. Let's get more in the center. And this is where you make or break how you want your recipe to go. So we get it like this, and then what we do, instead of oil, we take some water and we get it all nice and wet. As wet as you can get it, to be honest, it does not matter. All over. Because this is going to stop it from sticking when we twirl it up. You can use oil, but then I find water's easier to deal with because it's not really slippy. So yeah, so it just goes over, then over, and just like that. Almost like you're doing like a twisty dough bar. I don't know, I've never made bread, you'll know, Courtney.
Yeah, like a pretzel.
Because what we're going to do when we're finished is we're going to unravel it, and we're going to have these, now what's happening here is you want to have a little bit of tension on the dough, because then you'll have a more meaty bite to it, because if you just left it soft, it would just be I don't know how to explain it. There's no, with meat it's kind of twirls on itself, and it's got spongy. Yeah, it'll be a bit more spongy. So you want to maintain a little bit of, you want it to be a little bit taut, and that's why instead of just doing a log or two little smaller logs, I've done this instead. Right. And what you want to do is,
because gluten likes to mesh with itself. So when you give that tension, that causes the gluten strands to elongate together, which makes a better mouthfeel.
You want to make use of the parchment, keeping it elongated. You'll notice it starts to come in on itself. You want to keep it stretched out to keep it a little bit taut. And all you're doing using the parchment for is to stop the muslin from getting too dirty, and also to keep it stretched, because gluten wants to come back in on itself, so we're just keeping it stretched.
Yes.
And then we're just pretty much going to do the same thing again initially with this, making sure it's still taut. Now, this is where things can go a little bit wrong. So you want it to be tight, but you don't want it to be too tight. So I usually leave a tiny bit of give at the very start, and then I roll it a little bit tight. You don't want it too tight, because it needs, even with this, it needs a little bit of room to expand.
Right.
And then what we're going to do, we're going to get some string, and we're going to tie each end. And at this stage also, you want to make sure you're not tying it too tight.
Yes, because it will expand while it's cooking, and you do not want it to split.
No. So you find this bit here just to make sure it's going that way, and you twist it around. So this is where you take the string underneath, right? And you're gonna in a fiddly way tie a knot. But right, so if you tie a knot towards the right near the seitan, it's not going to have room to expand. If you tie the knot here, it's going to have room to come out a little bit like that. So you want to bring it, twist it tight to the seitan, but then you don't want to knot it right near the dough. You want to knot it a little bit further down, and that will guarantee a little bit of give. So you keep it twisted, and then just however I've done that, and then look, you can it twists open a bit. Then look, and then you just double knot it really quickly.
So Jack would like to know on the finished product about how long it will last in the fridge after it's cooked.
It will last up to 7 days in the fridge, in a stored container. And I try and keep it in a container where there's the least amount of oxygen as possible, which slows down the spoiling a lot quicker. But 7 days, it's good. After we've done the double knot, I just like to knot it again. So I'll bring it under itself, either side, and then just knot it, double knot it again, just to make sure it's definitely in there. And then we're just going to repeat the same process the other side. So we're just going to do the exact same thing again. Make sure you're twisting it around on itself that way.
So you're only going to knot on each end? You're not going to knot it anywhere along the rest of the log?
No, because otherwise it kind of comes out like that and it ruins the
Lumpy.
texture of the, yeah. Cool, so then we have that. So, problems. So you remember we brought the water to a very, very gentle simmer at the start. If you can check the temperature of the water, 90 degrees and above, what's going to happen is, if you've not done this tight enough, it's going to balloon out and it's going to be softer and spongier. If you've done it too tight, it's going to split and burst. Not aggressively, but in a way that ruins it. And this could be a little bit too specific, but so with the dough, you want it to go in like that rather than like that, because if you put it in like that, you're going to get thinner squash bits. If you put it in like that, because it's going to round around your pan, right? If you put it in like that, you still got you still got the lumps going through it basically, and that's going to go in for 2 hours. And one more step. So because we're subjecting it to water, it's got the chance for all the spices in it to kind of come out. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and counterbalance that a little bit. So there's no measurements involved in this. I'm just going to chuck some cumin seeds in.
Okay.
Do the same with some cumin powder. Like not much, maybe like half a teaspoon, maybe 3/4 of a teaspoon of them. Like a sprinkle of chili flakes.
About how much water do you have in your pan?
Well, this is a 10-litre one, and I've done it 3/4 of the way up.
Okay.
Because yeah, I'll come to that in a second actually. So I like to just cut open the cardamom pods a little bit just to make sure you get the insides, and just put 2 of them in. And then a little bit and then just like a splash of the tikka powder, which is just going to help keep in the subtle flavour that we're going to add to later with powder. So what was it you said? How much water's in there? Yeah, so I'll talk to you actually about what problems you can face once it's in a minute too. So we're going to tentatively, and try and, in the way I said, folded that way, just plonk it in. And I use a wooden spoon to just press it down to the bottom and just have it curving round the edge of the pan. Because there's a few things that can happen. When it starts cooking, it will start to expand and become like rock solid. That can tend to float up to the top, and you might even get like a quarter of it just hanging out the top of the water, and that's not going to cook very well. So you want to try and have it smushed around the edge to start with, and it will harden that way, and the force of it will stay like that. And if it starts to pop up uncontrollably, which sometimes it does, what I've done is I've just got something like this, and literally just kind of like sat it on it, just
Put it down?
just to weigh it down, basically, just so that I know that the seitan's underneath the water. So yeah, when that's in, you want to put the lid back where it was, where you had the simmer, and I'd give it 10 minutes and then just have a quick check that you've got that nice rolling simmer. But you want to set your timer for 2 hours.
And do you need to check water levels during that time, or?
No, if you've got the lid on,
No.
if you've got the lid mostly on, so I have my lid with just a bit of a crack because the way my flame works, that's how it works. It'll be different depending on your cooker. But no, mine doesn't need to because I got the lid on. If you have it with the lid off, you may need to check and just top the water up a little bit, and preferably with like tap hot or near boiling water, just so you don't slow down the cooking process. And then when it's done, it will look a little something. Well, it'll look like this. So this is a finished one. So it's this, you can see this is where it was curved around the thing. It's actually cooked that way. When it comes out, as most people probably know, it comes out hot and like inflated. You just leave it to sit and it just goes back down like this. This is one at 82 degrees. You can see it's still that thin shape. This is one at 92 degrees. Uh-oh. It exploded and went really fat and kind of all flabby, look. You see it? So this bit's undercooked because it popped out, and this bit exploded.
Yes.
This was 92 degrees and a little bit tighter. This is how I learned.
Right. But you can still salvage that and grind it up and use it as crumbles, or there are some things that it's not unusable. It's just not perfect for what this recipe is.
Exactly. So when you get your finished version out, this is what you'll do with it. So keeping your muslin cloth intact, because this can be used over and over and over and over again. All I do is I just soak it in boiling hot water, fairy liquid, bicarbonate and a little bit of white vinegar, and it's good to go again in 15 minutes.
Yes.
This
will last for years if you take care of it correctly.
That's one side. Let's quickly do the other. So this is where we start to, so we've processed the dough in a way that helps us at this point now. So everything after, so we've mixed the dough together, that's by the by. You're mixing your wet and your dry and you're making a basic dough. The part after that, up until now, was getting us ready for this point. And this part is getting us ready for the end point. So it's all very specifically done based on what recipe you're doing. So we take the parchment off.
This is always my favorite part, to tap it and see.
Yeah. So you remember we wrapped it over on itself. Now, I would suggest when you take it out of the pan, leave it for an hour till it's warm, and then just kind of find the seams and crack them a bit. Because if you wait until now, it's going to be very difficult. There we go, look, you can see it. That's one of the...
Yes, once it cools down, it's much harder to find those seams. But if you do cool down too much, you can just kind of lightly press on the counter with it, and it will kind of show you where those seams
yeah. So
are
all I did was I kind of just like went like that to find the crack, and then I saw one appear. Mm-hmm. And all you're doing is you're following the seam.
Yes.
Just like this. Where does it go this way? We're about to find out. And you can see where the two ends were, and now it's going to unravel, I hope. There we go. So I can even just cut this like that. So this is how we started before, remember? So it's got a thickness to most of it. What we're doing is we're getting a knife. I'll just find a point like this, cut it in half. You see how because we've cooked it slowly, it's got density to it. There's barely any of those little bubbles. So the slower the cook, the more dense it is. Yes. And you want that with meat, you don't want it too bready. So what we're doing is, I'd say about, I don't know how much. I mean, you'll know what bite you want, but it's kind of like like that, like quite thin, not too chunky.
Right.
Let's see, that's a little bit too thin. You'll kind of find your knack. There we go. Kind of like.
Right. You don't want it to fold over on itself. You
Just.
want it to have a little bit of stability.
Is this focused? Yeah. Just like
Yeah,
that, basically. Kind of like that kind of thickness.
Yeah.
And you want to chop all of it like that. I'm not going to sit here and do that because I've actually already got one that I've done. But what I wanted to show you was, so say when you get to, if the grain follows, you can see how the grain follows round. So if you're chopping this bit, following the grain, you're going to get to the end point and then you're like, oh God, what do I do now? So I just kind of like start to slice going around like that. Or you could just like chop off that bit and eat it. Like, who cares? Mm-hmm. It's tasty. And then you can start.
Yes, it is.
And then you can start going from here. Right. And you will do the whole thing like that until you have done all of it. So I made a version of this recipe. So when I cut the log, leaving a bit at the end, I tried one where I just cut it in half. And you can see they're all circles. They're all just like a you sliced up some salami, a bit like that. That is another way to do it. I think the bite's better doing it this way, and I also think if you see the difference, all the shapes are different, which you find with things like chicken. Like they're all different sizes, whereas these ones are all circles. So I feel like there's more authenticity.
If you decided to switch up your spices, you could make a pepperoni or a salami or something like that with it, correct? And slice it the other way?
Yeah, you could. Yeah, you want a completely different dry mix of flavours. And if anybody has any questions surrounding stuff like that, feel free to ask. But yeah, so we've got all our different shapes and sizes now. And this is where we'll start to add the tikka. So there really is nothing special to this. I buy store-owned tikka powder for ease. And what you want to do, you want to get your scales and you want to do a tablespoon of the tikka powder per 100 grams, basically. And then you want to weigh out, well, I do it in 200 gram batches, basically. So I just dump in and break apart 200 grams. That is almost perfect. And then, so it's 1 tablespoon per 100 grams of the chicken pieces. So it's 1 tablespoon. And you want like a decent tablespoon, not a flat one, but not.
Right.
That's always
a little heaped up.
Yeah, and then you just put the tub on, just give it a good shake. Make sure you tip it upside down so you don't just have everything staying at the bottom. Shake it round, lots and lots, and then you got your pieces. Now,
ta-da!
Ta-da! What's really important, so when we put the apple cider vinegar in, partly it was to help get rid of the gluten flavour. This tikka powder, when you've coated it like that, resist the urge to eat any now because it's not going to be as good. Because what you're going to get is you're going to get the tikka powder hit, and then you're going to get the seitan flavour. If you leave it overnight, it'll all soak together. What's the word? Like dry marinade together, and it will all taste the same. So don't eat any now, basically.
Seitan is always better if you can wait 6 to 8 hours.
Well, here's the problem. You cook it in the water, you leave it to rest and leave it overnight. Then you cut it up into pieces, and then you flavour it, and then you leave it overnight again. But you have to. That's just the way it works. Otherwise, like I said, you will get the hit of this, and then you'll get the flavour of that. You won't get them combined into one. And I promise, if you give it 2 days, everyone will love them, and they'll find them very moreish, because that's what I've found. And that is about, so what can you use these in, I guess? So I have them in
Yes,
sandwich.
that's what I was getting ready to ask.
I remembered. So you can make these in I put them in a sandwich a lot, like a tikka sandwich with red onion, some rocket, some tomato and some mayonnaise or something, some vegan mayonnaise on some sourdough bread or something. Or you can add it, if you do a cold pasta salad, you could do a cold tikka pasta salad, you can throw these in cold. You could have them in a wrap, you could have them in a regular salad. You could do what you want, but like I said, I've made them to be eaten cold. So that's the way I will always use them. But you can cook them and try them, like it doesn't matter, you can give it a go. You may love it.
Yeah.
That's essentially that. What you really want to be careful when you're taking it out of the pan, because it's going to be super hot. So what I do is I find some sort of elevated griddle of some kind over a sink or something, and I just use my tongs and just get it out carefully, plunk it on there, just leave it for like an hour just to cool down.
Yes.
And then remember, and then you can cut it out, take off the parchment and kind of find the seams, and then put it in a tub, leave it elevated again, wait for that to cool down, and just shove it in the fridge. And then the next day, unravel it like we did here, chop it into these pieces, and then we do the 1 tablespoon of tikka per 100 grams, shake it up nice and good, and then leave it in the fridge again. And then don't try it till the next day. Or try a piece the same day and then try a piece the next day and see the difference.
To see the difference,
yeah. I've got a lot of recipes that I used to sell over Christmas. So I'm planning on doing a Christmas product series, probably in partnership with Courtney. So that's something you should be able to gain access to at some point towards maybe a couple months before Christmas. Try and get on a live stream once a month. Other than that, feel free to comment on here. I'll answer any of your questions, and yeah, see you next time. Haha.